The public nature was essential. Women wearing branks were led through streets on winter market days, displayed at crossroads, sometimes chained to pillory posts, where passers-by were encouraged to mock them. The inability to respond to defend themselves verbally while freezing in iron cages was part of the punishment's psychological genius. A French visitor to Scotland in February 1596 wrote, "I witnessed a woman bridled with iron led through Edinburgh's frozen streets while citizens threw refuse. The device had transformed her from person to object, her suffering amplified by winter cold that made the metal burn against her skin." But not all Renaissance punishments targeted individuals in private chambers. Some transformed execution into public spectacle that could extend across multiple winter days. No punishment better exemplified the Renaissance fusion of engineering theatricality and systematic cruelty than the breaking wheel during the brutal winter months when crowds were largest. In February 1589, Germany witnessed one of the most documented uses of the wheel when Peter Stump, accused of werewolf attacks near Cologne, faced this punishment before thousands of spectators in the freezing weather. The event was so significant that pamphlets describing it were printed and distributed across Europe with woodcut illustrations that still survive. The wheel itself was a masterwork of Renaissance engineering, typically 8 feet in diameter, constructed from oak reinforced with iron bands. It featured precisely spaced gaps where limbs would be threaded through. Master Wright Johannes Steinberg of Cologne left detailed specifications in his Guild Book of 1562. The wheel must bear 200 weight without flexing. Spokes should be oak-aged minimum 5 years. Balance must allow single-handed rotation when mounted vertically. These weren't improvised devices, but precision-engineered platforms that worked better in winter when wood contracted uniformly in cold. The process followed exact protocols developed over generations and refined through Renaissance systematic thinking. First, the condemned was tied to the wheel with limbs extended through the spokes in the freezing February morning. Then, using an iron bar or hammer, the executioner would break bones methodically, not randomly, but following a prescribed sequence that Renaissance anatomists had determined would maximize survival time while ensuring eventual death. The Frankfurt Executioner Manual of 1573 specifies begin with the shin bones. Proceed to the thighs, then the forearms, then the upper arms. This sequence was based on medical understanding of shock progression, and winter cold made victims survive longer because hypothermia slowed bleeding and kept them conscious through more breaks. Master executioner Franz Schmidt of Nuremberg kept a diary from 1573 to 1618 documenting 361 executions he performed during all seasons. His entries include precise details intensified during winter January 1581. Broke J. Rurg Prown on the wheel. 11 blows required. Survived 2 hours and 14 minutes despite freezing weather. Crowd approximately 800. Weather clear but bitter cold. His meticulous records transformed execution into data collection, noting how winter conditions affected survival times. Victims in January typically lasted 30-45 minutes longer than summer executions because cold slowed blood loss and prevented rapid shock. City records from Augsburg show expenses for a wheel execution in February 1591. Lumber for scaffold 12 golden payment to executioner, 8 golden guards for crowd control, 6 golden musicians for processional, 4 golden printing of moral pamphlets, 10 golden. Refreshments for officials, 5 golden. The execution was a civic investment requiring substantial planning, particularly in winter when scaffolds had to be constructed on frozen ground and crowds needed longer to gather in the cold. The display after death was equally important. The broken body woven through the wheel's spokes would be hoisted high on a pole where it might remain for weeks, preserved by winter cold, creating vertical monuments to justice that would last longer than summer corpses. But if the wheel broke bodies in full public view during winter spectacles, The final punishment will examine combined Renaissance engineering with winter's deadliest weapon, water. In 1543, during a particularly harsh January, Augsburg used drowning cages for 3 women accused of infanticide. The execution was scheduled for dawn when the river was partially frozen, city bells summoning witnesses through the winter darkness. The women were lowered simultaneously, but at different speeds into water so cold it caused immediate shock, creating a hierarchy of suffering that reflected their perceived levels of guilt. The City Chronicle records the first expired after 7 minutes, the second after 12. The third was raised and lowered thrice, before final submersion lasting 23 minutes in total in the frozen water. The cages themselves were masterpieces of ironwork, commissioned from Nuremberg's master metalworker, Hans Grunwald, in January 1520. The specifications required cages that could hold 2 people, presumably couples convicted of adultery, forcing them to watch each other drown in winter water. The city paid extra for mechanisms that allowed guards to raise and lower cages without approaching the water's edge, a safety feature revealing practical Renaissance thinking about winter river dangers. Grunwald's workshop records show each cage required over 200 pounds of iron, 60 hours of labor, and specialized techniques for underwater corrosion resistance in freezing conditions. Winter drownings added another dimension of horror. In German states, holes were cut in frozen rivers for cage drownings, combining freezing with drowning. The shock of water at 24 degrees Celsius would cause involuntary gasping, accelerating water inhalation. Bodies retrieved from January drownings showed distinctive preservation that Renaissance physicians documented with scientific interest. Dr. Heinrich Stromer of Nuremberg wrote in 1558, "The winter drowning produces unique corpse characteristics. Rapid cooling prevents normal putrefaction." These observations suggest applications for preserving anatomical specimens. His medical interest in execution consequences shows how winter punishment served scientific advancement. The same cold that made drowning more terrible also made bodies last longer for anatomical study. The engineering evolved to allow for repeated immersion during winter months. Guards could lower victims until they lost consciousness from cold shock, raise them for revival in the frozen air, then lower them again into ice water. This cycling could continue for hours, creating prolonged executions that demonstrated authorities' complete control. The Frankfurt Protocol of 1582 specifies winter drowning to commence at first bell after sunrise. Minimum 3 council members present despite cold. Physician to monitor for hypothermia before drowning completion. Body to remain displayed until ice formation requires removal. The same workshops that produced these devices operated alongside those creating Renaissance art and scientific instruments. In Nuremberg, the metalwork district that produced astrolabes and clocks also manufactured execution equipment during winter months when outdoor work was impossible. The craftsmen moved between projects without distinction, applying identical standards of precision, whether creating timepieces or torture devices. Franz Schmidt's diary documents this duality: morning entries about breaking bodies on wheels, evening entries about attending church services, no apparent contradiction in the Renaissance mind that created beauty and perfected suffering simultaneously. The decline of these methods came gradually through the 1600s, not from humanitarian evolution, but from changing concepts of justice. The Enlightenment favored quick, efficient executions over extended winter spectacles. But the systematic thinking, the careful documentation, the engineering precision, these Renaissance innovations in organized cruelty influenced modern bureaucratic approaches to state violence. The chambers beneath Renaissance palaces are tourist attractions, now their terrible purpose sanitized into historical curiosity. But the lesson remains: human brilliance without moral constraint creates monuments to suffering. The Renaissance showed us what happens when creativity serves power without compassion. If you want more historical reality about how civilization perfected cruelty, subscribe to Flow of History. We're revealing what actually happened behind the legends.